DJ, turn it up, 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 which is the only part of that whole song that my kids know. Probably the only part I want them to know. But it means they sing that one part over and over and over, which is the way this class should have felt, like we did the same thing over and over and over. So we're going to make a list of all the stuff you can expect to see on the final. And I hope as we go through it, you're like, how many times are we going to have to see this? Well, as many times as you're going to have to see the map. I hope you did see that video and took notes. I think many students have said it's very helpful. But we started with a z-test for mu, and we did both hypothesis test and confidence interval. So there's two different questions I could get from this, and we've been doing those for many, many chapters, and we've even had an exam before that. From there, we moved into t-tests for mu, and also the t-test matched pairs, and the independent t-test for mu1 minus mu2. We've also done testing proportion and two proportions, and for all of these, we could talk about doing a confidence interval or a hypothesis test. There's one more I want to add here, even if it's out of order, because the test for the slope has both a hypothesis test and a confidence interval. The other test we've talked about, which is the chi-squared test of independence and the goodness of fit, they have a hypothesis test component, but not a confidence interval component. And some of you didn't realize that until just now. Really? So here's the different kinds of hypothesis tests and confidence intervals we can do. More specifically, you might see some questions asking you about the implications of a type 1 or a type 2 error, or the definition of power or confidence, and often those are to say what alpha levels should be justified in this scenario. The definition of confidence questions, everybody hates those, but hopefully by the time you get to the final, you feel like you're starting to get a handle on those guys. These kind of questions are really important to me. If I gave you a bunch of confidence intervals, could you say something about the p-value for a hypothesis test? Or knowing the p-value for a hypothesis test, can you say something about confidence intervals? Those are tricky because you really have to understand well what each of those are doing. I'm probably going to end up making a whole nother video because often students feel like this is a whole new type of thing. So look for the video on that, and that'll help explain what these guys are about. Calculate the sample size if I want a confidence interval with a certain margin of error. How large should I do for my sample? Cannot do type questions. Don't miss those. You'll get hit points because you got it wrong, and you'll lose time trying to do a question you couldn't do. But these are really important to me. We learned certain things in this class. I need you to understand that there's things beyond this class that we have not covered, and you should know where those limitations are. And there's some vocabulary specific to the regression chapter. You should be comfortable with residuals, how to look at them, what kinds of patterns you can see in them, and which assumptions are violated. Being able to do predictions, watching out for extrapolation, and correlation. What does it mean, and what do you look for, and what are its limitations? As well as the math definition for correlation. And then a bunch of vocabulary terms like, what does it mean to be significant, either practical or statistical? And sources of bias, and identifying what kind of bias is going to be inherent in the survey. Sampling schemes, different ways of picking people to be in your study. Lurking variables, those are always really hard. People don't like those. And experiment versus observational, those two terms are really important, mainly because you can determine lurking variables and whether there's correlation or causation out of that. And there's some tricky stuff you've seen all class long. Z-scores that look like maybe they could be p-values. Can you keep them straight? Z-scores that are obscenely huge. Does that even make sense? Actually, those do happen in real life sometimes. P-values greater than 0.5. And that goes along with if I switch the alternative, what does that do to my p-value? Usually a p-value greater than 0.5 means you had the wrong alternative. And often, I like to go back through the exams and say, are there any questions that you guys should have done well on and you didn't do well on past exams? Let's try throwing that question back in and see if you can do better. So do go through your old exams, make sure you feel comfortable. So everything on this board should be, yeah, here he goes again, same stuff as always. If there's something on here that you're like, I really don't get it, I don't understand, now is the time to go find a tutor, contact me, contact TAs, find someone who can help you. And one last note, as you look through this list, you should be impressed. This is not trivial, easy stuff. And as we reach the end of the semester, if you feel like this is really easy for you, maybe you should think about applying to be one of our tutors. We always look for people who've done well and like teaching it to other people. But at least you should feel proud of what you have done in this class.